Hey class, it is Friday, November 10th, and this is your check-in. I've been watching the news with a lot of fascination lately, and I'm really glad that we are all here now doing this work that we're doing because it's been a really interesting little time for women's social action. Um, we started with Harvey Weinstein, and now the seams seem to be coming apart with more and more women coming forward and and telling their stories about the powerful men that have sexually harassed them. And I was watching TV last night as the revelations of Louis C.K. were coming out, and I found myself feeling really shocked at the extent of this. And then I stopped and I thought, why am I shocked that so many men are being suddenly accused? I know from my studies, I did my master's thesis on sexual harassment, that almost half of women report being sexually harassed, and really it depends heavily on how you ask the question. A lot of women won't say that they've been sexually harassed because maybe it's something that they haven't reported. But if you ask women the question a little bit differently and you say, have you ever had unwanted sexual advances or unwelcome sexual attention in the workplace? The number shoots way up. So it's very difficult to really know what the true extent of this problem is. But I do think that if we could take how many women have had experiences of sexual harassment and extrapolate that, we have a lot more men out there who need to be held accountable, to be totally honest. And I'm partly excited. I'm happy that this seems to be a good time for people to come forward, speak their truth, and for us to discuss this issue as a society. I think it remains to be seen how all of these things play out. Whether the victims are believed, although you do think that in cases where there are 5 separate women in separate incidents, that it doesn't seem like they're all lying. It seems like perhaps there's some merit to it. But we don't do a good job of in the way we treat victims of sexual harassment and sexual assault in the media or the court systems. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I'm really excited that you all are working on the issue of violence against women, which this broadly falls under, and also that you are doing your media reports during this time when these issues are so much in the national conversation. It'll be really interesting to see for me to see how those, how you all think about the way that the issues get talked about in different news media outlets. Other things regarding the class, some of the discussions that are happening in the class, I think the one correction that I've needed to make is that we often get this this idea that's promulgated to us in our education and in our news media that the United States is exceptional and that therefore the status of women in the United States is exceptional. And actually, the status of women in the United States is not exceptional at all. It's mediocre. We rank below a number of countries. In the one that I posted in the discussion boards was the number of women in politics. That's particularly not a good ranking for the United States. We do not meet international human rights standards for preventing discrimination against women, specifically in terms of our reproductive rights policy. And there are many countries in the world where women have better access to health care, better economic opportunities, better representation, and it really depends on the factor. I don't think we can, but the UN does periodically put out rankings for the status of women in countries around the world, and I think it's really important for us all in the United States not to believe this idea that women in the United States have it better than anywhere else. Because part of what that does is it is a way of our nation telling us that we shouldn't complain and ask for more rights. And that is really disturbing. And so that's part of the reason why I think, particularly in this class, we can't just believe the rhetoric of women in the United States have it the best when that's not substantiated by the data. I am, like I said, very encouraged at what's happening now. I'm hoping that some of the politicians who may or may not be accused, that some of their seats might be filled by women, or at least by men who don't abuse women. So I think this is overall a really great time for us to be doing this work. I do want to make sure that everybody is on target for their midterm and on target for their final. Starting this coming week, although it's already posted, you will be working on your action plan. So that's taking your intentions for the experiment with activism project and putting those into a concrete action, something that you can do in the next couple of weeks that will be appropriate to this group, appropriate to the amount of energy you have, feasible for you, and that also will hopefully make a small difference. You're not going to make a substantial difference in a couple of weeks, but make a small difference in the issue that you're working on. Other reminders, we are starting to get to the end. I'm pulling out my syllabus now. The midterm essay is due the 11th. We'll then have week 5 where we'll focus on activist politics. I think that the readings in that week are going to be really helpful for you to start thinking about how you interact with each other in your own activist group. And then there's really only 2 weeks left as we start to hit the finish line and go into really more of our project work, which is what I would like to do in the last week. Now for this week, the questions really focus on the idea of when feminists gain some traction in the state, in the government, in public policy. What kind of difference does that make? And I think that for this group, you particularly want to think about that in terms of violence against women, which is one of the questions that I asked. But I'd like you to think about that more broadly. Is this the solution, more women within state power, to women's limited position in society? Or do we need something broader than that? In a lot of ways, it's connected to the question that I asked the week before about connections to national movements or national governments versus international feminist organizations. But I want you to think really about the way that women working within the auspices of government have been able to really accomplish some wonderful things, but also have been limited in what they can do. And I'd also like you to think about the issue of intersectionality, because when we say the condition of women, it's easy to see how violence against women kind of affects all women, but it affects all women very differently depending on their socioeconomic status, as we saw particularly in the case in South Africa, where some women are under tribal laws and other women are under a different set of laws. We also saw the differential access in abortion and the differential risk to women for back alley abortion depending on race and class in Brazil. And then the last issue that, or the first issue really that I'd ask you to think about is education. Remember that while girls' education is important to all of us as feminists, we have a lot more work to do for girls who are in racially oppressed groups than we may realize. And looking at the case specifically of Black girls in the United States and Muslim girls in France. So um, think about both the successes and failures of state feminism and also the issues of intersectionality that are starting to come up. We're going to be discussing that a lot more next week. And I look forward to seeing you on the discussion boards and speaking with you more about all of these issues.